Back in my day, while other kids were throwing bricks at each other and robbing banks, I was bettering myself by playing Harvest Moon. It taught me the value of a hard day's work, and that with enough eggs, I can force anyone into a long-term relationship with me. While my farming venture kicked off with A Wonderful Life, the game that I always remember most fondly is Friends of Mineral Town, the GBA remake of Back to Nature. Well, now it just so happens my favorite remake has been remade as Story of Seasons Friends of Mineral Town on Nintendo Switch. It's common knowledge now that after Marvelous and Natsume got a divorce, Marvelous continued the series as normal under the name Story of Seasons, while Natsume decided to take advantage of Harvest Moon's brand recognition and create the equivalent of Tappy Feet in video game form. So, since the remake is handled by the same people who made the original, it should be in good hands, right? Well, if I told you now, you'd have no reason to watch the rest of the video. As you'd expect, Friends of Mineral Town's story is pretty straightforward. After your summer vacation gets tragically canceled, your family ships you off to your weird old grandpa's place to spend summer at his farm in the middle of nowhere. Even though that sounds like the start of a horror movie, it actually works out pretty well, because you get to ride a cow. Fast forward 20 years and Grandpa catches a mild case of death, leaving you with his trash farm full of trash. Now it's time to firmly grasp your hoe, grow some crops, get rich, and seduce the local wildlife. Most of the game revolves around time management, and selling anything you can get your adorable little hands on, farming obviously being where the big bucks are. Each season has its own variety of crops that can be grown, with different values and growth cycles. You're given a gigantic plot of land to work with right out of the gate, only most of it can't be fully utilized without upgraded tools and stamina acquired throughout the game. So instead of broccoli and parsnips, you'll mainly be growing roccoli and sticks. Writing is hard. Semi-early in the game, you also acquire the ability to befriend and hire harvest sprites, little magic elves available in 7 wacky flavors. They can be assigned basic tasks like watering crops or feeding animals, to make farming less of a time sink. And no, it's definitely not slave labor. I gave them some grass, plus I think they might be weirdly into vegetables. To break up the monotony of everyday life, you can partake in a handful of festivals sprinkled throughout each month, like horse racing or cow watching. Some can be fun, but they usually tend to be hands-off experiences, especially during the first year where you can't really participate in most events for one reason or another. The Frisbee competition, for instance, kicks you out as soon as you arrive, because your dog forgot that every Harvest Moon game starts you off with a dog, including the game this is based on. There are still pets in the game, they just don't come until later. Other daily activities are scavenging for materials in the wild, fishing, mining, and taking care of animals, including a handful of weird additions like flavored cows and rabbit balls. Fishing in particular is pretty basic, even compared to something like Animal Crossing. You basically just throw your line in anywhere and wait for an exclamation mark, with no real skill involved or reason to catch different fish. However, there is a pretty cool feature where people will run onto the dock while you're fishing, trapping you in place for hours until they finally decide they have something better to do. Speaking of townsfolk, there's a wide assortment of characters to chat it up with, each more one note than the last. She likes books, he likes plants. She's old, and he's a doctor whose parents named him Doctor. At least he found his calling. Even if the villagers aren't very interesting and repeat the same 5 things every day, they still benefit from a less robotic localization job this time around, and have plenty of scripted events to help make them a little more likable. With enough bribery, some might even take your hand in marriage. There are 7 bachelors and 7 bachelorettes total, 2 being brand new additions, Brandon the carpenter and Jennifer the nature hobo. And for the first time in series history, you can marry anyone regardless of gender. More options are always a good thing, unless you choose Rick. Rick is just the worst. Look at him with his stupid impaired vision, thinking he's better than everyone else just because his mom sells dumb chickens. Guess what, Rick? I have chickens too, and a cow, but you don't see me bragging about it. Also, newsflash, there's nothing behind that fence. You gopher. Ugh. Believe it or not, Rick looked even lamer in the old game, but a new look won't help him escape his true self. The redesigns in general are all over the place. Some look better, others look worse, and a few look like completely different characters. Who are you? I know this is supposed to be a remake, but this might be taking it too far. In a similar vein, I'm not entirely on board with the art style they chose for this game. It's a little too sterile and lacking in detail. Everything's just so flat, almost like they dipped Magical Melody in a bucket of bleach. Also, I feel weird trying to romance these baby creatures that are supposed to be in their mid-20s. However, my absolute biggest issue is the sound design. The music is alright, but the sound effects and environmental noises are crazy bad, which you would expect to be good in a game like this. Imagine in your brain what breaking a rock should sound like. I bet it's not this. Collecting coins causes me physical pain, and the cows sound like a recording of a recording. The worst offender by far is the footsteps, because you have to hear them all the time. It's just the same noise repeated over and over again with no variation in pitch. Doesn't matter if you're walking on dirt, or grass, or concrete. It's all the same. The one exception is on the beach, where it somehow manages to be worse. And it's made even more obvious during rainy weather, because the rain volume is turned incredibly low for some reason. The only way to make it stop is turning off the sound effects altogether, or mashing the R button, making you ice skate everywhere like a loser. I know this won't be a big deal for most people, but Ocarina of Time, a game made over 20 years ago, already had footsteps figured out. It just seems really lazy. Okay, back to a positive. For fans of the original, the core gameplay experience is extremely faithful to what we had on GBA, only improved upon with tons of quality of life updates, most notable being a visible stamina meter and an entirely revamped inventory system. No more carrying a basket around to hold more items. With that said, coming back to Mineral Town after playing Stardew Valley or even Rune Factory is a very different experience. It's the same type of game, of course, just with less of everything. Farm customization is limited, the map is smaller, mining is simpler, just generally less to think about every day. None of that is objectively a bad thing. I can see the appeal in having a more streamlined farming sim. My problem is that I never have to question what I'm going to do each day, because I can easily fit it all into my schedule, which in return makes everything start feeling repetitive more quickly than more recent games. Adding to the repetition, days go by at light speed, like 10 game minutes pass every 5 seconds. And taking into account that this world has 1 month per season, that means one entire Mineral Town year passes in only one real world day, implying that these people have a shorter lifespan than most Game of Thrones characters. It also means it takes them an hour to walk down the street. All in all though, Story of Seasons Friends of Mineral Town is still a pretty chill game. Makes you wonder why they decided to add an easy mode this time around. The hardest part is living in the same reality as this monster. It does a decent job of removing what didn't work in the original, while adding some much needed improvements to smooth out the experience. I just wish they would have gone further with it, to bring the series up to par with more recent games. That's why Friends of Mineral Town gets a C+. Personally, I would recommend Stardew Valley or Rune Factory over this game any day. But like I said earlier, there's an appeal to keeping things simple, and I had a fun time overall. Plus, it was cool seeing the gang again, even if they had some work done. Thanks for watching, subscribe if you want, and I'll see you next video.